Stories that make your blood run cold, where truth is darker than fiction, and every word could be your last. You think this is just a video? No, this is a warning. Welcome to the darkness.
The rain did not fall that morning. It arrived, soft and deliberate, as though the city itself had drawn a slow breath and decided to exhale in grey. Storefronts gleamed with thin reflections, people hurried in silence, and the smell of wet pavement carried the dull sweetness of metal and soap. On the corner of a street too narrow for its own importance stood a bank, modern glass, marble pillars, and a smile of polished chrome above the doors. Inside, numbers ruled the air. Olga Mironova stood in the queue. She had stopped counting days since the bank had released her polite word for erasing someone from payroll. Yet her legs remembered the rhythm. Stand, wait, shuffle forward, repeat. There was comfort in habits that no longer paid. She clutched a file of papers she did not intend to hand over. Behind her stood Pavel Kovalyev, once the night guard of this very building. His coat smelled faintly of rain and old tobacco. He gave her a brief nod. "You still come here?" She smiled without humor. Some ghosts haunt themselves. Across the lobby, a young woman bent over a form at the self-service counter. Irina Solovyova looked like someone who hadn't slept in seasons, skin pale with monitor light, fingers twitching from caffeine. She was writing with the precision of someone coding on paper, not filling a bureaucratic form. Outside her window at home, hard drives slept like stones. Inside them hid the evidence she had once discovered: numbers that didn't balance, names that vanished, and a truth that had cost her job and almost her sanity. The automatic doors whispered open. Mark Levin entered. He moved with quiet purpose, as though measuring the room with each step. The staff looked past him, the way they looked past every middle-aged man in a coat that had seen better winters. He stopped by the information board, scanned the laminated notices, and let his gaze rest on one small line: customer complaints, unresolved accounts. He touched the corner of the paper, as if testing whether the words were real. From his patrol car outside, Officer Igor Rutsov noticed the man. A habit, not suspicion. The name tugged at something faint in memory: an old case, a warning, a story of a thief who had walked away clean because his crime had made moral sense to the jury. Rutsov sipped his coffee and told himself he was only watching the rain. Inside, Mark turned. Olga recognized him immediately, the man who once helped her carry groceries at the market years ago. The one with the tired kindness that never asked for anything back. He nodded to her. "You still keep time with them." "Time's cheaper than money," she said. "Then maybe it's worth more." They both looked toward Irina, who now stared through the glass at her own reflection. Mark followed the line of her sight and saw not her face but what she carried behind it. Something electric, contained, dangerous. He had found who he was looking for. That evening, 4 people met in an abandoned warehouse at the edge of the industrial quarter. The city's hum leaked through the walls like distant machinery. Mark laid a photograph on the table. A woman with short hair holding a child. "This is why we start." He did not explain further. Olga made tea. Pavel unpacked an ancient tape recorder. Irina opened her laptop and killed the Wi-Fi signal. They spoke little. They listened more. When the kettle clicked, Irina pressed record. "Say it," she told Mark. He drew breath as if opening an old wound. Because the system stole and called it loss. Because what they hide behind numbers has faces. Because justice forgot the weight of one. The tape whirred, catching the sound of rain on tin. The next morning smelled of asphalt and plans. Mark began collecting fragments. Maps, schedules, lists of names. Pavel described the bank's interior from memory, the guards' habits, the hours when cleaning crews came and left. Not blueprints, only rhythms of ordinary routine. Olga noted which clerks showed compassion and which recited rules like scripture. Irina traced the hidden roots inside the bank's digital veins, not to steal, but to find the buried truth of erased accounts. This isn't about money. Mark said. We're not robbing. We're reclaiming. Night fell early that week. Irina worked under a single bulb, eyes raw from code and light. She was building something fragile, a door that wasn't a door. Every keystroke felt like confession. When the program finally responded with a single blinking cursor, she whispered, almost human. Olga came behind her with a mug of coffee. You should sleep. I will, after it breathes. By dawn, Rutsov sat in his car outside the bank, reading an anonymous email that had arrived overnight. No sender, no subjects, only 3 words. Check your mother-in-law. Attached, a document. Transactions, signatures, proof of accounts opened and closed under false names. He scrolled until he found one that bore hers. His stomach clenched. He realized he was already part of whatever was about to happen. When morning came, everything looked ordinary. The lobby smelled of coffee and plastic pens. At exactly 10:15, Olga entered carrying a folder of papers. At 10:17, Pavel took his place by the door. At 10:18, Mark stepped through the revolving glass. Outside, in a cough across the street, Irina sat with her laptop open, fingers poised above the keys. Ready? Mark's voice came through her earpiece. Now, she whispered. And the world held its breath. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the monitors inside the bank flickered. Receipts printed lines of names that weren't supposed to exist. Screens showed transfers reversed. Debts forgiven. Numbers rearranging themselves into something closer to honesty. Customers gasped, clerks froze. No one screamed. Truth doesn't sound like explosions, it sounds like silence where lies used to be. Olga slipped her folder onto the counter. Inside were copies of letters never answered, accounts closed without reason, families destroyed by clerical fiction. This can't be real, the clerk whispered. It already is, Olga said. Outside, Irina pressed send. The archive shed built bloomed through the network like wildfire, not stolen data, but copies of what should have been public all along. Every erased file, every forged signature, every proof of fraud spilled into light. Rutsov saw the chaos from his car. He reached for his radio, hesitated. He could call it in, or he could listen. He set the radio down. By the time backup arrived, the files were already everywhere. The building's power flickered, alarms wailed, the rain outside turned silver under police lights. Irina watched from the cough window, trembling, not fear, but awe. It's done, she whispered. Rutsov escorted them out quietly, saying nothing to the other officers. Olga looked back once, saw her own reflection in the shattered glass of the entrance, and realized she no longer felt small. That night, the city burned with headlines. Major bank leak exposes decades of fraud. Irina sat alone on her apartment floor, laptop closed, rain tapping the window. She expected triumph, but what came was exhaustion, the kind that feels like grief. She had given the world its conscience back, but she had lost the silence that protected her. Mark disappeared that week. Pavel went south, fixing doors for fishermen. Olga opened a bakery, where people queued for warmth instead of withdrawal slips. Irina kept moving, changing names, cities, screens. But the files lived on. Months later, a student found an old cassette in the university archive. It began with a hiss and a voice saying, "Because the system stole." And calls it lost, the voice belonged to a ghost who refused to stay quiet. The scandal aged fast. For a week, the city buzzed like a short-circuited wire. Then the noise faded. Truth, it turned out, didn't stay luminous, it oxidized. Olga read about it in the paper she used to wrap loaves of bread. Her bakery became a meeting place for the forgotten. One evening, a young woman came in, phone in hand. "My father's name appeared in the documents," she said. "He died believing he'd failed us. You gave him back." Olga handed her a loaf still warm from the oven. No charge. When the door closed, she sat down and cried for all the people she'd never meet. Irina lived like a ghost. At night, she scrolled through forums. Both sides' heroes and criminals felt like strangers wearing her skin. One morning her inbox lit up. Still breathing. No signature, only coordinates. An old warehouse by the river. Igor Rutsov had resigned. He spent his days repairing clocks. When Irina appeared at his door, he said, "Thought you were smarter." She gave him a flash drive. They plugged it in. Among the files a recording neither had heard. Lena's voice. "If you're hearing this, the reconstruction has begun. Truth doesn't die, it changes hosts." Mark reappeared in another city. He watched cranes over the water, heard a street musician play Eleanor's song. "It's done. Lena," he whispered. But the echo that came back was warning. At the warehouse, Irina, Rutsov, and Mark met again. "They're using what we started," she said. "Freedom or chaos?" "Maybe both," Igor said. "Light blinds before it heals." Weeks passed. The reconstruction spread. Teenagers quoted Lena's words as scripture. Governments called it data terrorism. Every attempt to contain it multiplied it. Irina taught verification instead of hacking. Rutsov protected them from the dark. Mark wrote letters to no one. The government launched Nova Trust. New logo, new promises. Mark saw the billboards. "They turn truth into property," Irina said. "They always do." Then came the broadcast. Lena's face on every screen. "If they silence us, speak louder. If they erase us, rewrite. Truth is not rebellion, it's memory refusing to die." People stopped in the streets. For 1 minute, everyone listened. In the months that followed, arrests began. Rumors said Irina fled. Rutsov vanished. Mark stayed long enough to buy bread and walk away. At the river, he played the old tape. "We never stopped losing, did we?" he said. The hiss answered. Somewhere across the sea, a server blinked awake. On it glowed a line. "Truth v2.0, reconstruction complete." Then Lena's voice. "We are not the fire. We are the smoke that shows it happened." Nova Trust's blue eye glowed over the skyline. To most, it promised order. To others, it looked like memory repackaged for sale. Irina lived under another name, repairing radios by the sea. She received an encrypted message, no words, just coordinates. Mark waited by the river where the warehouse had stood. "You shouldn't have called," she said. "You came anyway. Do you ever wonder if we started the wrong fire?" "No," she said, "but I think we forgot water." Rutsov joined them. He brought proof. The new system built from their own code. They turned truth into entertainment. "Then we end it," Irina said. "No endings," Igor murmured. "Only echoes." They called it the burn. Over 3 nights they erased themselves from the net. At dawn Irina pressed enter. On millions of screens the emblem flickered, reshaping into a line. The archive belongs to no one. The story continues. Then silence. A day of chaos. Then routine again. People still queued for buses. Only something invisible had shifted. "You did it," Mark told her. "No," Irina whispered. "It did itself." Weeks later Olga received a photo. 4 figures in a warehouse, half blurred. On the back, "Bread still rises in the dark." She pinned it above her oven. Lena's final message surfaced. "You can't archive fire. You can only tell where it's been. Systems forget. People choose. Choose memory." Irina boarded a train. In her bag, a notebook. "Us drive the color of ash." She whispered, "Version 3. The tracks curved toward light." The year turned without anyone noticing. The story of the Great Leak lived only in documentaries now. Olga's bakery thrived. She told children the truth was necessary. Irina repaired radios by the sea. Rutsov taught self-defense to children. Mark vanished into the mountains, writing on paper he later burned. One scrap drifted to the riverbank. Truth is a bridge you build, even if you know you'll never cross it. Decades later a professor played the old cassette for her students. "Because the system stole and calls it loss," one student whispered. "Who were they?" The professor smiled. "No one knows. That's why it worked." At night, the city lights reflected off the sea. Olga's bakery still stood. Irina's shop became a museum of sound. Igor's gym-trained generations, who learned to fight not from fear but from hope. Somewhere in digital space, The archive still pulsed, breathing like an old heart. A line of code appeared. You can't save the world. You can only teach it to remember. Late one evening, a radio on the shore caught faint static. Through the crackle came a voice almost lost in the wind. "We're still here." The woman walking her dog smiled, though she didn't understand. The horizon glowed faintly, as if lit from beneath. Light, still burning softer now, but steady. The kind of light that stays.